I have spent 30 years in uniform studying South Asian security dynamics and nuclear threshold behavior. I have watched three major crises unfold between India and Pakistan. I have sat in those Pentagon briefing rooms where we wargamed the unthinkable. Nothing in that experience prepared me for what arrived in the early hours of May 14th, 2026. 600 cruise missiles launched from mobile TLs positioned across Pakistan's strategic depth struck 14 Indian Air Force installations in a coordinated wave lasting 97 minutes. Initial battle damage assessment indicates complete or near complete destruction of approximately 25 fighter squadrons, totaling somewhere between 280 and 310 combat aircraft. The economic value of destroyed airframes alone exceeds $18 billion before accounting for ordnance stocks, hardened shelters, fuel infrastructure, and radar arrays. Indian Air Chief Marshal Vikram Singh confirmed losses in a restricted briefing to the Cabinet Committee on Security at 11:47 a.m. local time. Prime Minister Modi convened an emergency National Security Council meeting that remains in session as I record this. And Washington has gone silent in a way that tells you everything you need to know about where we actually stand when the nuclear threshold gets tested by actors we do not control. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first reviewed the preliminary imagery and cross-referenced it against known Pakistani cruise missile inventories, my initial reaction was disbelief. Not because Pakistan lacks the capability. They have been building that capability methodically for 15 years, but because the operational audacity required to execute a strike of this magnitude against a nuclear peer competitor represents a threshold crossing that changes the entire strategic calculus of the subcontinent. I have professional respect for the planning discipline this required. The mission coordination, the deconfliction of flight paths across 14 separate target sets, the electromagnetic warfare synchronization necessary to suppress Indian air defense networks, this was not improvised, this was rehearsed. And the human cost is something I want you to keep in mind as we walk through the operational mechanics. We are talking about young Indian aviators, ground crew, air defense operators, many of them in their 20s, who were inside those hardened shelters when the warheads detonated. This is not an abstraction. This is not a war game. These are sons and daughters who will not be coming home. In the next 38 minutes, I am going to walk you through 4 questions that every serious observer of South Asian security needs answered. First, what weapon systems did Pakistan deploy and how did they achieve simultaneous time-on-target coordination across a battle space spanning over 1,200 kilometers? Second, how did Pakistani missiles penetrate what was supposed to be a multi-layered Indian air defense network that cost $47 billion to construct over the past decade? Third, what does Washington's response, or more precisely, its non-response, tell us about the actual state of American extended deterrence commitments in the Indo-Pacific theater? And fourth, what does this threshold crossing mean for China's calculus regarding Taiwan, for Russia's assessment of NATO resolve, and for the broader architecture of nuclear restraint that has held since 1945? If this is the kind of analysis you have been looking for, the kind that does not soften the operational reality or sanitize the strategic verdict for domestic political consumption, subscribe now and stay with me. Hit like, drop your assessment in the comments section below this video. I read every single one. The people who watch this channel understand that honest analysis requires looking at capability without ideological filter. Let me be direct with you. What I am about to show you is going to challenge assumptions that have been embedded in Western defense discourse for 2 decades. Stay with me. Let me walk you through exactly what happened phase by phase, because the devil in this operation is entirely in the details. Phase 1 began at 0314 local time when Pakistani electronic warfare units initiated a coordinated suppression campaign against Indian air surveillance radars positioned along the international border and the line of control. Intelligence suggests that at least 18 ELT 568 tactical jamming systems were activated simultaneously across a 950-kilometer front. These systems generated false target returns and saturated S-band and L-band radar frequencies that Indian aerostat surveillance balloons and ground-based early warning radars depend on for low-altitude cruise missile detection. The jamming created approximately 14 minutes of sensor degradation. 14 minutes does not sound like much until you understand that modern subsonic cruise missiles flying nap-of-the-earth profiles cover roughly 16 to 19 kilometers per minute. That 14-minute window was the difference between intercept opportunity and total surprise. Pakistani planners understood the Indian sensor grid better than Indian operators understood their own vulnerabilities. That is the first strategic verdict. Phase 2 was the actual missile salvo itself. Open source analysis combined with satellite imagery suggests Pakistan deployed a mixed package of at least 4 different cruise missile types. The Babur 1B, with a range of 700 kilometers and a 450-kilogram conventional warhead, formed the backbone of the strike, likely accounting for 320 to 350 of the total missiles launched. The Ra'ad-2 air-launched variant, fired from Mirage III and JF-17 strike aircraft operating inside Pakistani airspace, contributed an additional 110 to 130 rounds targeting forward air bases within 350 kilometers of the border. The Babur 3 submarine-launched variant, a weapon system Western analysts consistently underestimated, appears to have been used against coastal targets, including INS Hansa in Goa, contributing roughly 40 to 50 missiles. And the Harba anti-ship cruise missile, repurposed in a land attack role, likely made up the remainder of the count targeting naval air stations on India's western seaboard. This was not a single weapon system. This was a deliberately diversified package designed to complicate defensive response by forcing Indian air defense batteries to engage multiple threat profiles simultaneously. The missiles flew at altitudes between 40 and 80 meters above ground level for the majority of their flight profiles, using terrain masking to evade radar detection. Precision navigation was enabled by a combination of inertial guidance, terrain contour matching, and terminal optical correlation against preloaded satellite imagery of the target complexes. Circular error probable for the Babur family is assessed at somewhere between 8 and 14 meters. That level of precision meant that individual hardened aircraft shelters, fuel storage depots, and ammunition bunkers could be targeted with single missile allocations rather than requiring multiple rounds per target. The efficiency of the targeting mathematics is what allowed Pakistan to achieve strategic effect with 600 rounds rather than requiring the 1,200 to 2,500 missiles that older doctrine would have dictated. Phase 3 is where the Indian air defense network failed in ways that are going to require a complete doctrinal overhaul. India operates a multi-layered integrated air defense system that was supposed to provide redundant coverage against exactly this threat profile. The outer layer consists of long-range S-400 batteries purchased from Russia at a program cost exceeding $4 billion. The middle layer includes indigenous Akash surface-to-air missile systems. The inner layer relies on quick-reaction Spider and QRSAM point defense systems, protecting individual high-value installations. On paper, this architecture should have achieved intercept rates above 60% against subsonic cruise missile threats. In operational reality, initial assessments suggest intercept rates remain below 18%. 18%. Let me be precise about what that means. For every 100 Pakistani cruise missiles in the air, 82 reached their targets. The failure had three distinct causes. First, the electronic warfare suppression in Phase 1 degraded early warning to the point where defensive batteries received engagement cues 8 to 11 minutes later than doctrine requires. That delay collapsed decision timelines and forced intercept attempts inside minimum effective engagement ranges. Second, the sheer volume of the attack, 600 inbound tracks appearing simultaneously across 14 geographic locations, overwhelmed battle management systems that were designed and tested against raids of 40 to 60 missiles maximum. The Indian Air Defense Network experienced what, in technical terms, we call processing stack overflow. Human operators could not designate targets fast enough. Automated systems could not prioritize intercept queues effectively. And third, Pakistan deliberately targeted the S-400 batteries themselves in the opening minutes of the salvo using anti-radiation variants of the Babur missile that homed in on the 91 N6E acquisition radar emissions. At least 4 S-400 batteries were struck and destroyed before they could execute a single intercept. You cannot defend against an attack if your defensive systems are eliminated in the first 30 seconds of the engagement. The targets themselves were selected with surgical precision to achieve maximum degradation of Indian air combat capability. Ambala Air Force Station, home to the first squadron of French Rafale multi-role fighters that cost India $240 million per airframe, suffered complete destruction of at least 16 aircraft inside hardened shelters, plus the station's primary fuel depot and its aircraft maintenance complex. Hindon Air Base near Delhi, headquarters of Indian transport and tanker squadrons essential for force projection into the Himalayas, lost 19 IL-76 and C-130J airframes, crippling strategic airlift capacity for months. Halwara Air Base in Punjab, operating Jaguar deep strike aircraft, reported catastrophic damage to 12 shelters and the total loss of its runway cratering repair equipment, rendering the base non-operational even if aircraft had survived. Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, Bhuj, Adampur, Pathankot, Srinagar, Leh, Bidar, Pune, Goa, every single installation within 700 kilometers of the Pakistan border or the Arabian Sea coast absorbed between 28 and 64 cruise missile impacts. The Indian Air Force effectively lost its forward defensive posture in a single night. That is not hyperbole. That is mathematical accounting. Phase 4 is the part that Washington does not want you to focus on, but I am going to be direct about it because it exposes the gap between declaratory policy and operational reality. Within 90 minutes of the first impacts, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command issued a private communication to both New Delhi and Islamabad urging restraint and offering mediation support. Public statements from the White House press secretary emphasized concern, called for de-escalation, and referenced America's commitment to regional stability. What you did not hear was any reference to treaty obligations, any invocation of strategic partnership commitments, or any suggestion that American military power would intervene to restore the status quo ante. There is a reason for that silence. The United States has no defense treaty with India. America has a major defense partnership framework, intelligence sharing arrangements, and weapons sales agreements totaling $22 billion over the past 5 years. But we do not have a NATO Article 5 equivalent that obligates American military response to an attack on Indian territory. Pakistani planners understood that distinction. They knew Washington would condemn, urge, express concern, and ultimately do absolutely nothing that risked American lives or American strategic interests in a conflict between two nuclear-armed states that we do not control. This is what the Pentagon will not say publicly, but every serving officer understands privately. American extended deterrence commitments in the Indo-Pacific are selective, conditional, and functionally limited to treaty allies Japan, South Korea, Australia, Thailand, and the Philippines. India, despite 2 decades of strategic convergence rhetoric and Quad partnership frameworks, remains outside that hard circle of obligation. Pakistan tested that assumption on May 14th. The assumption held, Washington stayed out, and every defense ministry from Tokyo to Taipei to Riyadh is watching that silence and updating their own assumptions about what American security guarantees actually mean when they are tested by actors willing to accept risk. Now, let me zoom out from the operational mechanics and talk about what this threshold crossing means in the broader strategic environment, because this is not a South Asian story. This is a global inflection point. What happened on May 14th is not an isolated border conflict between two regional rivals. It is a live-fire demonstration that middle powers operating outside the American alliance structure can achieve strategic surprise against opponents with superior economic scale and defense budgets by exploiting focused investment in asymmetric capabilities. Pakistan's defense budget is approximately 1/7 the size of India's. Pakistan's economy is 1/10 the scale, and yet Pakistan achieved a 25-to-1 cost exchange ratio in this operation. Each Babur cruise missile costs approximately $1 million to produce. Each destroyed Indian Rafale fighter represents a $240 million loss. Each destroyed IL-76 transport costs $95 million. The aggregate value of assets destroyed in one night exceeds $18 billion. Pakistan expended roughly $660 million in cruise missile inventory. That is a return on investment that every strategically ambitious middle power from Iran to North Korea to Venezuela is going to study in forensic detail. In Moscow, Russian defense planners are watching this operation and updating their assessments of NATO's Eastern Flank air defense architecture. If India's $47 billion multi-layered system collapsed under the weight of 600 subsonic cruise missiles, what does that imply about Poland's Patriot batteries, Romania's Aegis ashore installations, or the Baltic states' NASAMS coverage against a Russian saturation strike using 3 M54 Kalibr missiles launched from submarines, surface vessels, and ground-based TELs simultaneously? The operational lessons from May 14th translate directly into European contingency planning. Russia has been building exactly this kind of saturation strike capability for 15 years, while Western analysts dismissed cruise missiles as yesterday's threat compared to hypersonic systems. This operation just validated the cruise missile as a relevant, lethal, and cost-effective tool of strategic coercion. In Beijing, Chinese strategists are absorbing the lesson that American security commitments are rhetorically strong but operationally hollow when tested by actors outside the formal treaty structure. India was supposed to be the cornerstone of Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy, the democratic counterweight to Chinese expansion, the Quad partner that would anchor a coalition of democracies containing Beijing's ambitions. And when India's Air Force was gutted in a single night, Washington issued press statements and offered mediation. Beijing is updating its Taiwan calculus accordingly. If America will not risk confrontation with a nuclear-armed Pakistan over the destruction of Indian military capability, why would America risk confrontation with a nuclear-armed China over an island that Washington does not even formally recognize as an independent state? The credibility of American extended deterrence just took a hit that no White House press briefing can repair. For the Gulf states, this operation is a validation of their own pivot towards strategic autonomy. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, they have all watched American security commitments erode over 2 decades, from the refusal to respond decisively to Iranian strikes on Saudi oil infrastructure in 2019, to the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, to the muted response when Houthi missiles hit Abu Dhabi in 2022. The Gulf monarchies have been diversifying their security partnerships, buying weapons from China, hosting Russian diplomatic engagement, and building indigenous defense industrial capacity precisely because they no longer trust American willingness to defend their core interests. Pakistan's operation against India is going to accelerate that trend. If you are sitting in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi watching Washington's response to this crisis, you are not seeing a reliable security guarantor. You are seeing a declining power managing its retreat. And for the broader developing world, this is a proof point that indigenous military industrial development and strategic autonomy deliver more security than dependence on great power patronage. Pakistan built its cruise missile arsenal under sustained sanctions, technology export controls, and international isolation. Pakistan did not buy these systems from America or Russia or China. They built them. The Babur is based on reverse-engineered Tomahawk technology recovered from unexploded U.S. missiles that landed in Pakistani territory during strikes in Afghanistan, combined with Chinese and North Korean technical assistance and indigenous engineering adaptation. It is a Frankenstein system assembled from scraps and sanctioned circumvention networks, and it just achieved strategic effect against a military power ranked fourth globally in defense spending. That lesson is going to resonate in Tehran, in Pyongyang, in Caracas, and in every capital that has spent the past 2 decades under Western sanctions, being told that indigenous defense development is futile. May 14th just proved that story wrong. I have said for years in testimony and in private defense consultations that the era of uncontested American military primacy in regional theaters outside the immediate NATO and East Asian treaty zones is over. I warned that middle powers were investing in affordable asymmetric capabilities specifically designed to exploit the seams in U.S. alliance architecture. I argued that the Pentagon's focus on high-end peer conflict with China was creating blind spots in our ability to deter or respond to middle power aggression in theaters we consider secondary priorities. That warning was ignored. The institutional assumption was that countries like Pakistan, Iran, or North Korea could be managed through sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and occasional punitive strikes. May 14th is the operational refutation of that assumption. We are no longer operating in a unipolar world where American preferences structure everyone else's behavior. We are no longer in an environment where military capability correlates directly with defense budget size. We are in a multipolar, fragmented security environment where focused investment in niche capabilities can achieve strategic surprise against materially superior opponents. The nuclear dimension of this crisis remains unresolved as I record this analysis. India has not yet responded kinetically. Prime Minister Modi's emergency national security Council meeting has now extended past 18 hours. The Indian military has elevated its nuclear alert posture to DEFCON 2 equivalent status. Pakistani leadership has made clear through backdoor diplomatic channels that any Indian conventional retaliation targeting Pakistani strategic assets or population centers will trigger a tactical nuclear response. And the international community, led by the United States, China, and Russia, is engaged in frantic behind-the-scenes diplomacy to prevent this crisis from crossing the nuclear threshold. The problem is that Pakistan has already achieved its strategic objective. India's forward air defense posture is gone. The aircraft that would have executed deep strikes into Pakistani territory in the event of a ground offensive are destroyed. The logistics infrastructure that would have sustained a multi-corps armored thrust across the international border is degraded. Pakistan effectively reestablished strategic parity through one night of precision fires. India now faces the question of whether escalation serves any strategic purpose or simply increases the risk of nuclear exchange without recovering lost capability. Here is the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to think carefully before you answer in the comments. Does India have any remaining conventional military option that degrades Pakistani capability without triggering nuclear escalation? Or has Pakistan successfully demonstrated that middle powers armed with precision strike arsenals and nuclear weapons can impose cost on larger neighbors that make conventional retaliation strategically irrational? That is not a hypothetical question. That is the question being debated in New Delhi right now in real time. Leave your assessment in the comments below. I read every single one because the people who watch this channel understand that these are not academic exercises. These are live strategic dilemmas with real human consequences. If this analysis gave you clarity that you are not getting from mainstream coverage, share this video. Hit like, subscribe to this channel. The next update on this crisis is already in preparation. I will see you in the next one.